to women's rights organizations, activists, and movements. I thank you and hope that you will make commitments and join the leaders of the Action Coalition on GBV in this bold, ambitious, and urgent vision to prevent and respond to gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity. Thank you.
Gabrielle, thank you so much. You had the unenviable task of trying to summarize countless debates and synthesize it so that this agenda could be accessible for everyone. And we really appreciate that. The overall impression that I have just hearing that scope of vision and that ambition is that we want transformation. We want to substantially, significantly move this agenda forward. And we hope that the world is listening. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our panel. And I see our fierce panel moderator, Priya Kvam, is joining us. Priya is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives at Breakthrough. Priya, we welcome you and you have the floor.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you all for joining us today for what promises to be a rich dialogue on the urgency of eradicating gender-based violence and the measures we must take to achieve this goal. We now begin the panel discussion. Each panelist will answer a question before we transition to an audience Q&A. Panelists, you will each have 3 minutes to respond. We urge you to keep your remarks brief. It is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist. Wendy Morton, MP, is Minister for European Neighbourhood and the Americas in the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Minister, what will it take to prevent and ultimately eliminate gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity by 2030? And how will this action coalition accelerate progress towards this goal?
Priya, Minister Wendy is running into some tech issues, so perhaps we could move on to the next speaker and return to her. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, no problem. So we'll now hear from our second panelist, Stephen Daines, Chief Talent and Culture Officer at Accor. Mr. Daines, as others have mentioned, the lockdowns and isolation of COVID-19 have had a devastating effect, including in the escalation of gender-based violence. How can the Action Coalition on GBV meaningfully contribute to building back better after COVID-19?
Priya, again, I think we'll have to move on to the next panelist. We're facing some tech issues, but we will return with both our first two speakers. Apologies.
Absolutely, and look forward to their inputs later in the conversation. Our third panelist, Gwendoline Lefebvre, is President of the European Women's Lobby. Ms. Lefebvre, why is it so important to support girl-led and women's rights organizations and movements to end gender-based violence? What type of support is needed?
Thank you, Priya, for this question. Hello, everybody around the world. As an umbrella organization with more than 2,000 members organization across Europe working for women's rights, we at the European Women's Lobby are very happy to be part of this Action Coalition with fellow co-leaders. Action Coalition which works on the fundamental issue of gender-based violence, violence against women and girls. We welcome the multi-stakeholder approach, which is really needed, and it's a pleasure to work with such great co-leaders. In my intervention, to be quicker, I will speak about women's rights organizations. This includes girl and women-led organizations, women's rights activists, grassroots organization, women peace builders, and human rights defenders. Women's rights organizations are essentials for women and girls' rights. They play a watchdog role and raise awareness on issues faced by women and girls all across the world. They defend and promote their rights. They provide essential services to women and girls, including victims of gender-based violence, which are essentials in crisis situations as the COVID-19 one. Women's rights organizations have been and still are at the forefront of responding to this crisis, providing shelter, counseling, psychological and legal support. However, they face very difficult situations all across the world, such as lack of resources, financial ones, human ones, lack of support, if not attacks from government. There are also existing strains from austerity measures taken a decade ago. COVID has only made this worse. Women and girls need those organizations to work well and to have protected access to them and the services they provide. Women's rights organizations need increased support. This is why we have agreed as co-leaders on the need for specific and concrete action towards women's rights organizations. Our main goal is to ensure that women's rights organizations are enabled and empowered to exercise their expertise in addressing gender-based violence, violence against women and girls. There are several steps to achieve this, including increased funding, international funding, national funding, and private funding to women's rights organizations. It also includes ensuring the increased leadership and meaningful participation of women's rights organizations in all decision-making processes. We hope to achieve those targets by 2026, and that many multi-stakeholder actors will commit with us to those changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for highlighting the ways in which we have to take a multi-stakeholder approach and really invest in girl and women-led organizations, addressing the multiple challenges that they face. Our next speaker is Kalliope Mingeirou, Chief of the UN Women's Section on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. Ms. Mingeirou, in 49 countries, there is no specific law against domestic violence. Only 4 countries have ratified ILO Convention 190 on addressing violence and harassment in the world of work. And in 45 countries, there is no legislation to address sexual harassment. How will this action coalition contribute to building enabling legal, policy, and resource environments to end GBV against women and girls in all their diversity?
Thank you, Priya, for the question. And before addressing it, just a very good morning and greetings to everyone in the panel and the audience. It is indeed very exciting for me as one of the co-leaders of the Action Coalition on GBV, and an honor to be here with you all. Priya, you raised a very good question, because in order to be able to implement any prevention strategies and responses at country level, it is indeed a prerequisite to have first a framework of comprehensive laws, policies, and national action plans in place that address violence against women and girls, as well as harmful practices, which criminalize all forms of gender-based violence, address impunity of perpetrators, and provide remedies and support to survivors of violence. And as Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, we also identified that emerging forms of violence, such as online violence, which was particularly prevalent during the pandemic, should be considered as a priority in our actions. Establishing a solid foundation that allows coordination among different actors and ensure a multi-sectoral approach to the issue is important for the sustainability of our work. And it has already been mentioned, but I want to reiterate that an excellent model of such a comprehensive, evidence-based and multi-sectoral approach to gender-based violence is the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative, which needs to be scaled up and replicated as a promising practice. Laws and policies that address gender-based violence should also be complemented with laws and policies that help women leave abusive relationships by regulating discriminatory divorce processes and custody of children and giving women access to resources and property. Our Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence also considered the ratification and implementation of international human rights legal instruments such as CEDAW, the Istanbul Convention, Belém do Pará, and others to complement the implementation of national legal and policy frameworks, strengthen the protection of survivors of violence and those at risk, and strengthen as well the accountability of governments. An excellent example of an international legal instrument is the recent ILO Convention addressing gender-based violence in the world of work, which also offers the foundation for employers, including in the private sector, to develop and implement policies to prevent and respond to gender-based violence, including domestic violence in the world of work. However, we know by now that the effective implementation of laws and policies, the monitoring and evaluation of their impact, and their adequate financing still remain a huge gap worldwide. It is important, therefore, to increase financing for gender-based violence prevention and response, including through government and philanthropic investment, as well as overseas development funding. It is equally important that to ensure that laws, policies, and programs are evidence-based, and they address the needs, especially of marginalized groups of women and girls. To this end, the Action Coalition also considered the need for disaggregated data collection, analysis, and its use as an important action to inform legal, policy, and programmatic reforms. We invite all of you to join this commitment and to change the world and address violence against women and girls in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your intervention and for highlighting issues both of protection for survivors and of accountability, and especially of the need to center marginalized women and girls. This is something that has been paramount for our Action Coalition, and it is heartening to hear you echo that. I now pass to the chair for our first audience poll.
Thank you, Priya. Okay, this is not something that we were able to rehearse in advance, so I'm crossing my fingers that technology and the good energy and the goddesses cooperate, because we're about to do a live poll. And I'm going to read out the question while I assume the technology collaborates. I understand the poll will just pop up on the screen for all of us, and then we'll answer it live and discuss the results. So the first poll question for all of us is the following. To prevent violence against women, we require successful strategies and interventions to check all that apply. A, transform harmful and unequal gender and social norms. B, prioritize campaigns to raise awareness about the harms of violence against women. C, work across sectors to implement combined strategies. D, prioritize interventions aimed at perpetrators of violence. And or E, work throughout the life cycle and start early. So I'm going to pause while I assume some technological magic happens and it appears. Ah, there's the poll. Okay, so everyone take a moment and put your answers in. Again, check all that apply. We're pausing while people decide how they want to answer. Remember, you're not being graded on this test. These results are for you just to sort of probe your curiosity and your knowledge of gender-based violence, intervention strategies. And soon we'll get to hear the results from the almost 400 people that are in this dialogue to find out, what do people think? What are their answers? And I don't know if the colleagues that are running the poll can give us the results, but I assume they will pop up on the screen soon. Okay, on my screen it says host is sharing results. So on the question, successful strategies to prevent women, I think it's supposed to be successful strategies to prevent gender-based violence, require interventions too. And actually we got very high results from all of them. But the highest single category was transform harmful and unequal gender and social norms. And the lowest category was prioritize interventions aimed at perpetrators of violence. Quite interesting results. And I wish we were all in a room together so that we could deconstruct the results and debate the results. I think I would be able to guess why I think D generated the lowest rate of response. And I think it's that because we know that just targeting perpetrators of violence is not a holistic approach. We need inclusive, integrated strategies, and obviously only focusing on perpetrators of violence displaces from the central narrative survivors. And of course, they're the people that we should be focused on. And the strongest intervention strategies would include a bit of all of these issues. So with that, and I just want to add, there are probably other issues that we could have added to the poll, like the importance of gathering data and disaggregating data, because we know that accurate data ensures that we apply the most effective tactics. But you know, this is a quick quiz in the middle of a panel. So we're trying to get through a lot of information, but you might be thinking to yourself, what are some of the other intervention strategies I use? And feel free to put your comments or questions about those other strategies in the Q&A. With that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Priya, to continue the conversation with our panel.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's meaningful to hear from our audience and to reaffirm the importance of a multi-sectoral and holistic approach. We will now resume the panel discussion. Our next speaker is Ixchel Adolpho Lucas, representative of Las Niñas Lideran from Guatemala. Ms. Lucas, at this Generation Equality Forum hosted by the Government of Mexico, a global call for commitment to the action coalitions is being made. Why is it important for diverse stakeholders, including civil society, youth organizations, member states, private sector, philanthropic, cultural, and faith-based organizations to join the Action Coalition on GBV as commitment makers?
Buen día a todos. Quiero partir de lo que dice nuestra visión de coalición de acción sobre violencia de género. El progreso hacia la eliminación de la violencia de género contra las mujeres y las niñas en toda su diversidad se acelerará rápidamente mediante una acción mundial más concertada, coordinada y ampliada. Como juventudes de nuestra región, niñas y mujeres, consideramos importante el trabajo conjunto de todas las partes interesadas en construir entornos seguros y libres de violencia dirigidos a niñas, jóvenes y mujeres. Y para lograrlo, nos encontramos concertando en este espacio de las coaliciones, proponiendo y trazando objetivos para el alcance de logros significativos en 5 años. La coordinación debe iniciar ahora con la integración de la niñez, adolescencia, juventud, mujeres de los Estados miembros, gobiernos, agencias de Naciones Unidas, organizaciones filantrópicas, del sector privado y de la sociedad civil, comprometidos a accionar desde la inversión, la ratificación de convenios y tratados, leyes y aprobación de servicios integrales de prevención, detección y atención de la violencia basada en género y el acceso a la justicia, libre de estereotipos y de corrupción que tengan perspectiva interseccional, intercultural, de género, juventudes y derechos humanos. Asimismo, reconocernos a la niñez, adolescencias y juventudes como sujetas políticas y dentro de los planes de acción. Por lo que hoy les invito a que asumamos responsabilidades y nos comprometamos con la coalición de acción sobre violencia de género en la ejecución del plan de aceleración global para la violencia de género que está integrado por 4 acciones, con el objetivo de eliminar la violencia de género en cada uno de nuestros países, regiones y a nivel mundial. Maltiosh, Chonte, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ixchel, and thank you for reaffirming the importance of an inclusive approach, especially one that brings in youth leaders such as yourself. We will now hear from Mónica Bottero, Director of the National Institute for Women in Uruguay's Ministry of Social Development. Ms. Bottero, much of the dialogue in our Action Coalition has centered on evidence-based strategies to interrupt and end cycles of violence, with a focus on the well-being of survivors. What strategies are critical to support the scale-up of coordinated, comprehensive, quality, accessible, and affordable services for survivors of gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity, including in humanitarian settings?
Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes para todas nuestras copanelistas y organizaciones. Es un honor para Uruguay poder liderar, ser co-líder en esta coalición con un tema que para nosotros es de una altísima sensibilidad. En Uruguay se ha implementado como política de Estado la importancia de la interinstitucionalidad en la respuesta. Esto significa considerar a la respuesta en violencia de género como un sistema en el que participa todas las organizaciones del Estado y también la sociedad civil como parte de esta respuesta. El sistema de respuesta en violencia de género en Uruguay está regido por una política que fue implementada a través de la ley 19.580, que es una ley integral que prevé directivas políticas claras para cada sector que tiene que intervenir: la educación, la justicia, la vivienda, la protección social y la salud. También incluye la formación de un consejo consultivo en violencia de género que integran todas estas organizaciones del Estado, además de la justicia y la sociedad civil, para generar políticas, sobre todo políticas sostenibles, planes de acción, acceso a los servicios y la interseccionalidad. Sabemos que la violencia de género es mucho más que la violencia doméstica, que tiene que ver con, en el caso de las jóvenes, con la violencia en los espacios públicos, de las personas mayores, que se ha notado mucho durante la pandemia en Uruguay. Las mujeres mayores de edad sufren violencia por parte de su familia, la violencia en los ámbitos digitales, que es una línea de trabajo que vamos a implementar. Por supuesto que para que estos sistemas, que son redes institucionales, puedan funcionar, el financiamiento es fundamental para su implementación. Pero también la interinstitucionalidad, el hecho de que se trabaje de manera coordinada en todo el Estado y que participe además la sociedad civil como un actor que siempre interpela, es fundamental en nuestra tarea de respuesta. Y un plan de acción, un plan de trabajo que además cuente con la financiación. En Uruguay, afortunadamente, hemos logrado incrementar en más de un 20% la financiación para la respuesta en violencia de género, y eso nos ha permitido trabajar más. De todas maneras, es muy difícil, es un desafío que tenemos de entendernos mejor con la justicia para poder garantizar el acceso de las mujeres a los sistemas de justicia. Les agradezco por la posibilidad de poder compartir esto con ustedes, y por supuesto seguimos trabajando hacia París.
Thank you very much. And thank you for highlighting the need for a coordinated response at the government level, one that engages the justice system, education, health, and that really involves a participatory planning process and policy-making process. A very important reminder. I have heard that the minister from the UK has joined us, and so we would like to return to her question. Wendy Morton, MP, is Minister for European Neighbourhood and the Americas in the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Minister, what will it take to prevent and ultimately eliminate gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity by 2030? And how will this action coalition accelerate progress toward that goal? And if the minister is here, if you could please unmute yourself and put yourself on video, that would be most helpful. We'll give it another moment.
Priya, the minister is online and she's coming on in just a second.
Priya. Okay, great. Thank you. Over to you, Minister.
Priya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you for joining us, Minister.
Priya?
Yes, I can hear you, Minister.
Can you hear me? Thank you, everyone, for your patience with all the technical issues. Thank you for your patience. Good. I can. Yes. I am so grateful to our colleagues in Mexico for convening this forum today. And this is a really big and important question that you've put to me. This has been a very strange year with COVID, but it has shone a light on the sheer magnitude of gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity in the UK, in Mexico, and all around the world. Before the pandemic, this violence was at horrifying levels, and I'm sad to say it has not gone in the right direction. Heartbreakingly, the global data launched by the World Health Organization and UN Women this month shows how devastatingly young violence begins for girls. And I share your outrage at the violence that millions suffer every day. We know many women and girls, including those from minority, ethnic or religious groups, those living with a disability, lesbian and bisexual women, and those with non-conforming gender identities, who are victims and survivors of violence, but who go unnamed and unhonoured. Crucially, we now have evidence, including from the UK programme What Works to Prevent Violence, that shows this violence is not inevitable. We can prevent it. Through that programme, interventions to tackle values and behaviours in homes, schools and communities achieved a 50% reduction in violence in just a few years. Together we have the opportunity, the obligation, to use this evidence to spur global action. And that is why I'm excited that the UK is joining forces with our co-leads to scale up evidence-based prevention programs over the next 5 years. We now have the knowledge to help eliminate gender-based violence within this generation. But we need political will and resources to be secured across the globe that match the scale of the problem and call the root causes like unequal gender power relations and the acceptability of men's use of violence against women and girls all around the world. This year, the UK will launch a new programme building on the success of What Works to implement proven violence prevention global programme. We want to work with others through the Action Coalition to harness the transformative potential of education, to shift harmful norms, to support healthy relationships from a young age. In short, we want to stop violence before it starts. And in particular, we encourage others to join us through this Action Coalition to engage ministries of education to strengthen school curricula and ensure comprehensive sexuality education that promotes gender equality, consent and equitable relationships. And the UK will champion the meaningful participation of women's rights organisations in the coalition and encourage increased funding and accountability. There is no time to wait. One more loss is one too many. The time is right to empower women and girls to fiercely protect their rights and to tackle the social norm of violence. And we are determined to work with you all to realise the true potential that this coalition has to change lives and do all we can to eradicate gender-based violence for good. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much for your additions, your meaningful additions to the conversation, and for naming those who are unnamed and unarmed, and especially those who experience different forms of marginalization. Much appreciated. We will now, I'll pass back to Jessica for our next audience poll.
Thank you, Priya. And I just have to say, I'm really loving watching Lisa's art and animation. Hi, Lisa, we see you waving at us. Thank you for bringing such strong visual imagery to our dialogue today. It's really powerful. All right, I'm just waiting for the colleagues running the poll to put it up on the screen, and then I'll read out the questions. This is our second audience poll. Thank you so much for being so quick. So this poll, which you can answer at any point, and I'll read out for simplicity. What do you consider to be the most urgent actions needed to address gender-based violence? A, focused strategies to address all forms of gender-based violence experienced by adolescent girls. B, address gender-based violence that occurs in conflict, crisis, and humanitarian settings. C, address women and girls with multiple and intersecting experiences of discrimination and oppression, which occur as a result of race, class, caste, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, migrant and refugee status, etc., or all of the above. How will you answer the poll this time? Please submit your answers. I've submitted mine already. Well, it was easy for me because I saw the question in advance. I'm looking forward to seeing your answers. And I'm sort of wishing that we had like that music that usually plays during a game show accompanying us while we wait for all of the colleagues to have time to fill out the poll. I would sing for you my own version of game show music, but I not only don't think you would welcome me back, I think you would come find me in my home and ask me to never sing again. All right, I wonder if the colleagues from the tech company could perhaps share with us the results of the poll. And I have to say, while we're waiting for that, I've been reading through the questions in the Q&A, and there's just intellect and ambition in this space is so amazing. Thank you for all of your questions. Okay, the results of the poll. What do you consider to be the most urgent actions to address GBV? By a landslide, all of the above. Why am I not surprised with this group that that's what we needed to talk about? You know, I think we know that there are different viewpoints on an issue like this. You know, some people might say, you know, to work on gender-based violence, we need to focus on a particular area. You know, perhaps it's to correct a historic wrong. But I think the majority of the respondents really said, you know, all of this work is urgent because we know that gender-based violence programming has been so deeply underfunded. As Hanna and Osa said from the very beginning, even these 25 years after Beijing. So it's really exciting to see this sort of spirit of indivisibility and intersectionality that comes from the responses to this poll, saying that, you know, there's clearly not one dimension of gender-based violence work where we can say mission accomplished. Clearly, we need to increase our efforts across all these categories. And I can tell you from dialogue with the members of the Action Coalition leadership that there's an absolute commitment to ensuring that none of these vulnerable groups, none of these critically important areas of work will be left out of the scope of work on this issue. In fact, this consultation and everyone participating really is welcome to share their specific knowledge on these issues. So thank you for your responses. And now I'm going to pass it back to you, Priya, to wrap up our panel.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you all for participating in the poll. Very illuminating and heartening to see that D, all of the above, was selected by so many people. We are missing, I believe, one of the two of the remaining panelists, so we will transition to the next portion of this conversation. Just to sum up some of what we've heard, we have talked about the importance of protections for survivors, of accountability, of engaging multiple stakeholders. We've talked about the urgency of increasing resources, including funding and capacity for women and girl-led organizations, and of making sure that our commitment to eradicating gender-based violence is one that is as inclusive as possible. We've recognized the need to intervene in the global crisis of GBV, keeping in mind other crises we face, the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as humanitarian conflict, and another, although not mentioned, crisis of our planet and climate. This blueprint for action is grounded in an understanding of these intersecting crises and of the need for inclusivity at every turn. Gender-based violence affects women and girls in all their diversity. And as the minister from the UK shared, it also disproportionately harms gender non-conforming people and others across a spectrum of gender identities and expressions. Breakthrough, the organization I represent, launched in 1999 with a music album called Manke Manjire, an album about gender-based violence and also about women's dreams. This pandemic, while in many ways a nightmare, is also an invitation to bold dreaming and world building and to concerted global feminist action. So with that, Jessica, I'd like to pass to you. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Priya. And thank you for sharing that historical note about Breakthrough's origins. I'd love to hear the music that you were describing. Maybe if we do another quiz at another event like this in the future, we can have that on in the background. So my understanding is that we're going to do a couple of things now. There's one more poll. So unless someone sends me a message saying we're not going to ask that poll question, I think I'm about to administer it. Yes, love it when the system works. Our final poll before we go to Q&A. Do you agree that emphasis needs to be placed on increased support and financing to girl-led and women's rights organizations to address GBV. All right, I think I might have a hunch about how this group is going to lean, but please log your answer so we can see how you all feel. And in the meantime, panelists, I want to let you know that we're going to pose 3 questions. You don't have to answer any of them, but you can answer, well, hopefully you'll answer at least one of them. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A using questions that come from our audience members. And we'll be going to that shortly. So if our panelists would get ready to turn their cameras and microphones on again, that would be great. And perhaps our tech team could put the results of the poll back on the screen while Lisa animates all of this. Okay, and by a landslide, yes, we agree, 96%. And I'm very, very curious about the 4% that disagreed. I would love to ask you what you were disagreeing about. You know, I think for me, when I hear a question like this, it reminds me that this Action Coalition really has a sort of specific focus across all the categories we addressed on financing. And that's because the Action Coalition found it important and in fact impossible to do groundbreaking work without more support in all forms, but perhaps especially more financing for women's rights organizations and girl-led organizations. And I think, you know, we're among friends, many of us take this for granted, but just to sort of punctuate why this is so valuable, it's so important because women's rights organizations are the key drivers of change. They're the key drivers of legal, political, and social change for women, for girls, and for everyone who experienced gender-based violence. And so women's rights organizations do the work, whether there's funding or not, and whether there's political will or not. And I just want to say, you know, I know many of those leaders, many women's rights organizations are in this meeting right now, and this is a sort of love letter to you because we see you, and we know that in the case of gender-based violence, you are the essential workers. So now I am turning to my phone as wonderful colleagues, Gabrielle and Hera and others are sending questions to me. Called from, when I last checked, over 60 questions in the Q&A, and I have 3 here. I'll read all 3 of the ones that Gabrielle is suggesting out. I'm not sure who suggested them initially, but Gabrielle chose these because she thought they were perhaps representative of cross-cutting themes that she saw. So the first one is, in what ways is the Action Coalition leadership seeking to engage with the development partners given the limitations in government funding? So let me repeat that. In what ways is the Action Coalition leadership seeking to engage with development partners given the limitations on government funding? A second question is, could you share more about the role of data across all commitments? I'll repeat that again. Could you share more about the role of data across all commitments? And then a third question is, how are governments and civil society and NGOs, including people of faith, especially faith leaders, in ending gender-based violence? And what work has included or should include faith leaders? So I want to invite the panel to respond. And I am, I guess, using my screen right now to see who would like to volunteer to speak. And I think if you heard a question that speaks to you, turn on your screen, turn on your video, turn on your mic, and please jump in.
Maybe Jessica, it's Gwendoline from the European Women's Lobby. If that's fine with you, I would like to partly answer the question on data. Thank you. According to us, this is the collection of data is a very important aspect of the work, our common work. It can be really challenging sometimes to have comprehensive data that allows us to be as ambitious as we would like to be. And we really need those data to go further. That's why we are developing commitments on the issue of data itself to ensure that we can find more and better sources of data in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Gwendoline, for speaking to the need of data. That's great. Osa, I see your hand is up, please.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say something about the financing, and I hope you will be happy to hear that I think the whole UN system and also UN Women, both my colleague Anita and others are working very hard on the relationship to the financial institutions and their much needed stronger emphasis on gender equality. And some of the national budgets obviously are very dependent on that. But I also wanted to say, and that's why I made that remark in my intervention, that since I have been a cabinet minister in a very rich country, I totally see that. But most countries actually have national budgets, but the money is used for other priorities. So I think we have to work on both tracks. We have to go back to the good old gender responsive budgeting, and we have to put pressure on governments to use the existing budgets also for gender equality and violence against women. Many of those budgets are very dependent on the financial institutions. I'm very aware of that, but I think we have to do both things, and that's our strategy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Osa, and thank you for the shout out budgeting as a critical strategy going forward. Did I just hear someone else jumping in to speak? Mónica, are you unmuted?
Sí, me gustaría, comentar un aspecto que no me parece menor, y es que la importancia del liderazgo tanto de las ministras como de nosotras, las líderes de los mecanismos de género, para liderar los procesos y hacer negociaciones y lobbies con los gobernantes, particularmente los de los ministerios de finanzas, para convencerlos sobre la importancia de financiar estas respuestas, en particular porque esto tiene costos para el país. Tiene costos la violencia de género, por eso, como decíamos antes, la importancia de los números y de los datos. Tiene costos para los sistemas de salud, tiene costos para el propio PBI de los países, la violencia de género. Y por supuesto, la importancia de que haya mujeres en puestos claves que tienen que ver con el financiamiento, con los presupuestos. En nuestro caso, en Uruguay, tenemos una vicepresidenta de la República y una ministra de Economía. Y esas alianzas, en nuestro caso, han sido fundamentales para acceder a un mayor financiamiento. Sin desconocer, por supuesto, que los organismos internacionales están cada vez más dispuestos a colaborar en esta área, porque estos argumentos que estamos manejando nosotros, ellos ya lo han comprendido.
Mónica, that is a good point. And I really want to sort of lift up your observation that not funding gender-based violence interventions does have a cost. We don't always count it, but whether it's hospital visits or emergency interventions in shelters, the destruction of life, of course, the destruction of individuals, mental health, that has a price too. So actually, although I don't think we should only work on gender-based violence interventions because it's cost effective, there is a financial argument to be made that not doing the right thing actually is very expensive. Thank you for that, Mónica. I want to see if anyone else would like to speak to this. Kalliope, I see.
Jessica, is that okay?
Yes, please. And then I see Ixchel. I think you just put your hand up. So Kalliope, you're first, and Ixchel, you're after.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. Just a small addition to the data point. I think apart from the fact that we need to strengthen prevalence surveys in order to get the prevalence and the rates of violence against women and girls, I think the Action Coalition has also focused on qualitative data and administrative data, that we need to strengthen this kind of data as well in order to inform especially programs and responses for particular groups of women and girls that they have been facing multiple forms of discrimination in a very systemic way all these years. And very often we don't get this kind of information for their actual needs from prevalence surveys. This is one. Second, concerning the faith-based leaders and the role they can play, and I'm happy to see that we opened the commitment makers list also to be open for faith-based leaders, which can play a very important role, especially in the area of prevention of violence against women and girls. And that has been highlighted during COVID-19, where we saw that given the digital divide and the fact that we were not able to adapt our responses and our prevention work for addressing the needs of survivors, faith-based leaders, they managed to have a community outreach and discuss about the impact of COVID-19 on violence against women and girls and the availability of services. Thank you.
Beautiful, Kalliope, and thank you so much for making sure that it's very clear that a hand is extended to any and all faith leaders that have a commitment to working on gender-based violence to prevent it. Thank you. Ixchel, you had your hand up. And I do have a few more questions as well, which we'll put to the panel after Ixchel speaks.
Gracias, Jessica. Bueno, pues la primera pregunta, cada uno de los líderes estamos comprometidos a poder buscar financiamiento para poder alcanzar este plan que hemos planteado, valga la redundancia, en estos próximos 5 años. Este es nuestro compromiso como líderes de la Coalición de Acción sobre Violencia de Género. También, como segundo punto, pues es muy importante que nosotros tengamos el respaldo de datos que nos puedan beneficiar en información para poder respaldar todas nuestras acciones o todas las acciones que vamos a estar realizando, ¿verdad? En base a esta información de datos que tengamos a la mano. Y por último, pues no solo los líderes religiosos, sino también los gobiernos, las organizaciones, todos fungimos con un papel muy importante en la sociedad. Todos somos líderes en cada uno de nuestros lugares de trabajo. Es así como nosotros también podemos colaborar en la eliminación de la violencia de género en cada uno de nuestros ejes de trabajo, en cada uno de nuestro entorno. Entonces, pues es muy importante que cada uno de nosotros podamos actuar de manera eficiente para este objetivo. Gracias, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ixchel. And thank you also for, the sort of frankness. We all come into this work in the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition with a similar commitment to seeing change on this issue, but we don't come to the table with the same experiences or the same resources. And so in order for us to realize this agenda, we need funds for civil society to help realize this plan. And we also need access to accurate and reliable data. And I think we also want to change the narrative around what data is considered credible, because we know that state and multilateral data collection around GBV is sparse. And part of what can actually help give us a clearer picture of the extent, the depth, and the breadth of gender-based violence is also by recognizing the value of civil society and academic institutions' contributions to literature about GBV. All right, I'm being told that we have just a couple more minutes on questions, but I think I want to just pose 2 questions if there's time. Oh, but first I'm getting a note that Lisa, our extraordinary graphic designer, is going to have to leave the session in a moment. So Lisa, I just want to publicly acknowledge you. As we see that lovely hand waving and drawing and animating this. My colleagues have sent the message that in the Q&A, which you surely can't read because you're so busy drawing, there's an outpouring of love for you. So thank you so much, Lisa, for all that you're doing. So 2 more questions. One is, how can civil society help implement this vision in our work? And does the coalition also identify and commit to addressing violence against trans and gender non-conforming people as part of the blueprint for action? And I see that we have 3 speakers left. And I want to see if anyone would like to speak to either of these questions. I think we all know that trans inclusion is absolutely indispensable and non-negotiable to any work on gender-based violence. So I'm happy to elaborate on that if others don't, but would anyone like to take either of these questions?
If I may, Jessica, I would like to say a few words about the question on civil society, because for us, they are essential actors of this path we are on together. And some of the civil society organizations are already part of the co-leadership, like some of us here, but we really hope that the Action Coalition will allow more civil society organizations, more women's rights organizations to be empowered and have the opportunity to engage within this work. And again, I would like to raise as it has been done during all this session, that to do that, the civil society needs more funding and to increase their meaningful action and participation in our common work. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwendoline. Mónica or Ixchel, would you like to comment?
Bueno, gracias, Jessica. Pues realmente el papel de la sociedad civil, pues para nosotros es muy importante porque son esas personas que están más cerca de la población. Y entonces realmente ayudan a poder realizar, ¿no?, este plan que estamos planificando para estos 5 años. Y realmente es un papel muy importante porque están cerca de la población y porque pueden conocer un poquito más a fondo las necesidades de todas las personas. Y luego, pues, en el tema de las personas transgénero, pues es muy importante que estén dentro también de este proyecto. Para nosotros fue muy importante integrarlos a este proyecto, porque pues estamos hablando de violencia sobre género, ¿verdad? Y estas personas están dentro de este concepto de violencia de género. Hay muchas personas que sufren esta violencia de género. Y entonces es por eso que nosotros los integramos, ¿verdad? Para no dejar afuera ningún tipo de violencia que esté sucediendo a nivel mundial.
Beautifully said, Ixchel. Mónica, make a last word.
Sí, la integración de de la violencia de género, de mujeres transgénero, personas transgénero, es parte, me parece que esencial, está en la propia definición de violencia basada en género. Es quizá la forma más descarnada de lo que podemos llamar violencia basada en género. Nos parece esencial que en la respuesta esté incluida una respuesta específica para las personas transgénero, pero también me parece fundamental que en esa respuesta sean parte activa las propias personas transgénero. Nosotros en el Instituto Nacional de las Mujeres tenemos ya integrada una técnica transgénero que está trabajando los temas de diversidad y que le hemos pedido que haga aportes a nuestro plan de respuesta, porque nos parece importante que ellos, además de ser víctimas en estos casos, también sean artífices de las respuestas y de las soluciones que tanto desde el gobierno como desde la sociedad civil se puedan implementar.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mónica, Gwendoline, and Ixchel, for your powerful interventions and concluding remarks. On my screen, I see 99 plus questions and comments. So I want to say we wish we could get to all of them, but the amount of engagement really shows how much passion and fire there is behind this agenda. And I want to invite people to actually consider going to the networking session on gender-based violence that is immediately after this. So starting in 20 minutes, if you want to continue this conversation, if you didn't get to ask your question directly and you've got a burning issue or you're dying to network with others who really do this work and want to see change, please go to that. It's immediately after. Okay, so now I'm checking my run of show to see what the next item is. I think my next item is to thank the remaining panelists, Mónica, Gwendoline, and Ixchel. You can turn off your video now. Thank you for being such rock stars. And next, I am going to Hanna, Kristjansdottir, to again come back to us and present the journey ahead. Hanna, would you turn on your video and your audio, please?
There seems to be, dear Jessica, some problem with my video, but I'm hoping you can hear me.
Hanna, we hear you crystal clear.
Great. I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody that has been joining us here today. It's been a super great turnout, as we know from the interest in the issue. I wanted to say a big thank you to the leaders that have not only shown us all their commitment around the issue, but all their willingness to sit down and join forces. I know this has been quite a journey because we come from different sort of fields and the different interests and so on and so forth. But now we have been introduced to the actions that this action coalition is presenting. And I think we can safely say that they are needed and will be changing the world for all women and girls around the world. So please join us. What I wanted to say in the final note, Jessica, is because we introduced you in the beginning to the journey, to where the journey was and what we did before we all came together in this forum called the Mexico Forum. So what I wanted to try and do in the end, by showing you again the picture you can see on the screen, is to tell you that now we are in Mexico at the kickoff, where you see all of the blueprints, you see the actions, and you see what we have done or our leaders have done to make sure that we move ahead for the coming 5 years, which is the time for the action coalitions. And today, and I'm super proud to be telling you this, that today we have been opening and we are launching the application platform for commitment makers, for commitment making. So all of you, all of the both individuals member states, international organization, youth-led organization, civil society, member states, etc., all of these ones and from the private sector can now join us via commitments. And we are encouraging you to make a groundbreaking commitment for the action coalitions. In this case, it would be the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, but as I said earlier, we have 6 action coalitions, and some of our commitment makers, as we call them, are of course joining more than one action coalition with their commitments. But you now, dear friends from around the world, have the actions, the 24 actions from the Action Coalition, and this is where we encourage you to be introduced to how to become a commitment maker. As you can see on the slide in front of you, the commitment makers, they are expected to make bold and transformative commitments for one or several action coalition. The commitment makers, although they are of course not the leaders of the action coalitions, but they play still a catalytic role in supporting the implementation and monitoring of actions. And they are of course to mobilize stakeholders around the action coalition theme and the blueprints. So we are inviting people and we are inviting partners to join the action coalition leaders in making sure that what has been announced today will happen. And when we discuss who can become a commitment maker, this is different from the leadership group, because the leadership group, they had to hand in a letter of intent and then we selected leaders. Everyone can become a commitment maker from all kinds of actors, as you can see below. And also we are inviting other institutions, media, local governments, academia, etc., to join us as commitment makers within the action coalitions. And this is also a bit different from the leadership structure, because what is expected of a commitment maker is first and foremost to make a commitment and act for equal when it comes to gender equality, and commit to making either a financial commitment, an advocacy commitment, a policy commitment, or a programmatic commitment to make sure that we can move in the direction that we are all wanting to see. And as we have said so often before, commitments should of course be game-changing, measurable, and ideally designed with other stakeholders. So we kindly ask everybody and all our commitment makers to join at our platform that has been launched today, and make sure, dear friends, that the commitments that will be made reflect the principles of the action coalitions, that they are intersectional, feminist leadership, and they also reflect on the transformation that we all want to see. So these are, Jessica, our calls and our actions, and what is next after Mexico, leading up to Paris. We are hoping to see loads and loads of super excited commitments that we will be launching then in Paris, after we have launched the actions here in Mexico. So my thanks and our thanks go out to all of the leaders, to everybody that joined today, and hopefully there will be many of you that will see the benefits and the great aspect that can be done if we join forces and become commitment makers. Over and out, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Hanna. I'm picturing you smiling as you extend that invitation to everyone, and we're smiling back at you. It is my great pleasure to be concluding the panel with some housekeeping details and some final remarks. Just first to reiterate Hanna's invitation to join the commitment makers, and to make sure everyone heard her say, everyone and anyone can become a commitment maker. So consider your own institution or institutions that you work with, urge them to get involved. The second housekeeping note is about the blueprint itself. Maybe you found it already, maybe you haven't, but I just want to be clear, the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition blueprint that we've been talking about these past 2 hours is available for viewing in the virtual exhibit hall. So please take a look. I know people were asking in the questions, where can I find it? It's up there, it's posted, share it with your friends. I want to reiterate a third housekeeping item, which is to please join us immediately after this for a networking session, and we'll have some space for participants to speak, and we would just love for you to join. And I was so glad that someone asked about trans inclusion in the work of the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition, that I also wanted to mention that tomorrow is a very important day. Tomorrow is the Trans Day of Visibility. So as you're thinking about what gender-based violence means to you, remember that it includes our trans siblings, our intersex siblings, our colleagues and friends who are non-binary, and think about what kind of action you can take tomorrow to shed light on human rights violations and human rights affirmations impacting trans folks everywhere. And now I'll wrap up with a couple of concluding comments myself. In conclusion, the idea of this action coalition is to generate new and increased and energized investments for gender-based violence prevention and redress. And we hope that these investments, many of which will unfold over the 5 years ahead, will transform laws and policies, will scale up evidence-driven prevention efforts, will drive social norm change, will bridge the financing gap, will increase the capacities of multiple stakeholders, will improve data collection, will strengthen access to services, and will empower girl and women's rights-led organizations and movements. This is an amazing opportunity to create tools beyond what we already have in our local community organizing, at the national levels, at the regional, and even the UN sphere. And the Generation Equality process, the Generation Equality Forum process, through the action coalitions, can help catalyze the hopes and dreams of the Beijing Platform for Action 26 years ago and the Agenda 2030. The work is not done. We know this. I just watched a beautiful documentary about the Beijing conference, and the energy, the vision, the ambition of the activists and leaders who were there was like, it was palpable. It was like jumping off the screen. But that energy hasn't gone away. You know, our work is still incomplete and we're still in the struggle. We actually have more people in the struggle now. There are more of us doing the work now, and we're needed more than ever. And I just really want to say, you know, this can be more. This can be a place to create new alliances and new commitments, really bringing together diverse stakeholders and really putting civil society at the table, not just in some side event as we usually are, but to work together for a world where gender-based violence has no place, and a world where those who were furthest left behind are put in the center of creation and decision-making and implementation, so that all of our commitments and policymaking and dreams come true. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your active listening and participation. And thank you all. And let's do it over the next 5 years. Bye, everyone.